Welcome, everyone. It is time for our August Legislative Policy Committee meeting to begin. Hopefully, everyone is getting their box lunch. I'm sure these are the best box lunches we've all ever had. So I'm particularly looking forward to whatever's still in the back there. We have a couple items of business we need to do before we get underway with our agenda today. The first of those is wondering if I can ask everyone's indulgence for just a minute. In Bountiful, we lost a really great colleague on Tuesday to a battle with cancer. And I was wondering if I could just ask the indulgence of the group for just a minute to take a moment of silence to honor Jesse Bell and his long service to the city of Bountiful and his support of all things municipal. So if you wouldn't mind joining me for just a minute. Thank you. If you're able and interested, we do have a memorial for Jesse that'll be taking place at Bountiful City Hall tomorrow night, Tuesday night at 6:30, and his funeral will be taking place Wednesday at 11. I can't say enough about what a great colleague he was. I know Mayor Harris joins me in just feeling like we were, quite frankly, the luckiest to get to serve with him. So on to other topics that are not quite so emotional. I need a motion to approve our May 20th minutes. Is there anyone that has thoroughly studied our May 20th minutes and is prepared to make a motion? Thank you, Mayor Burton. We have a motion and I see a second from Councilman Dugan. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It looks like we have unanimously approved those minutes. The first item on our agenda, unless Carson signals me differently, are you signaling me differently? Carson is going to do logistics while I say that our first item of business is we are going to hear from Joseph Anderson with the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands to talk about cooperative wildfire system changes. So, Joseph, where are you? Come on up. And we'll let you get underway. And after he has concluded his presentation, then we will move on to our reports from our advisory groups that Justin will lead us through. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for giving me a few minutes today. So I'm Joseph Anderson, representing the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And the reason I'm here is we've had some updates and changes to a program which 96% of you participate in, the Cooperative Wildfire System. This might be new for some of you and old news for others. So I'm going to start kind of at a beginner perspective here and just explain briefly what this program is and what it does. Okay, we're going to skip that. Now, here's the intent of the program. This is a partnership between the state of Utah and local taxing entities, namely municipalities, fire districts, and counties. The goal is to reduce wildfire risk across the state, and then also to broadly distribute the financial risk. The worry is that if there's a catastrophic wildfire within your jurisdiction, those costs could go into the millions and easily bankrupt a small community. That's what we don't want to have happen. So the state can step in, support you, take on the financial risk and the management of that wildfire if it hits that point. And in return, we ask that the local jurisdiction does some work to reduce that wildfire risk. So basic structure of this. Big picture, we sign an agreement which each city, town, fire district, county in the state agreeing that we're going to cooperate on wildfire. And as part of that agreement, the local entity agrees to have a cooperative wildfire preparedness plan. this is a long-term plan, usually about 5 years, whereby they outline the specific risks in that community and the plan to address those risks. And then each year, the state sends that community a statement that has the value of the risk, and this is outlined in statute. We look at the risk acres, if you have high wildfire risk, medium, low, and there's a dollar figure attached to all of those acres. And so you'll get a statement saying, hey, this year, the risk we're seeing on the map is valued at $4,000, or maybe it's $100, or in some cases it's $500,000. It varies wildly. And then each year you look at that dollar amount and create a plan to match that in the work that you're doing. It's a lot of mitigation work, buying fire engines, doing trainings, public ed events. The list is usually pretty large. In most of your cities, that's handled by your fire department. It does vary a little bit town to town, but by and large, it's fire department who's handling that. And then you report on those actions. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at what work is being done at the local level to stay in compliance with the program. So you might ask, what's in the agreement? Here's what you agree to do when you sign this piece of paper. Have that 5-year plan, the CWPP, complete and sign the annual monetary statement, the participation commitment statement each year, your annual plan, report on the things you do, make sure you have enough firefighters to address any wildfire in that initial starting stage, usually the first 24-hour period. If it's human caused, make sure that you're chasing that legal route for cost recovery. And the last two are county specific, so I won't go into that, but there's a fire warden and a WUI code aspect for county specific. So this program started back in 2017. And then in 2021, we had an audit, internal audit, and it discovered lots of major issues with the program. The bulk of the issues related to the fact that we weren't really seeing the intent of the program being met. And that was happening both on the state side and the local side. So lots of things we could do better on both sides of the fence. And as a result of this audit, there's a few changes that have happened and will be happening this next year. So that's what I want to talk about very briefly. One major issue was CWPPs. In about half of the communities in the state, there is no long-term plan for addressing wildfire risk. And that's a core component of this partnership, is that we have a plan to address that risk. So we're going to be looking at that more closely in the future, making sure that the stuff happening on the ground can be tied back to that long-term plan. We want to make sure the work being done is meaningful and actually addressing the wildfire risk. Another thing we've seen is everyone's happy to sign an agreement, but then it kind of gets forgotten about, falls by the wayside. So no work is happening on the ground, or if it is happening, it's just not being reported to us. So that's where I come in. My position is newly created to be able to take a closer look at this and partner with you to make sure reporting is happening and that we're doing meaningful work. So my job really is a support function to follow up and help each of the cities and counties and fire districts. The last thing that the audit was concerned about is this program can place, or at least used to place, a high administrative workload, especially on the smaller cities and towns. You know, and we're a really rural community that doesn't have a large tax base, doesn't have full-time staff. It could be challenging to comply with some of the terms of the agreement. So a couple things that have happened to fix this. One, we created a simplified online report. Takes 5 minutes to do something, to report an action and complete the yearly task. It's also a new option starting in 2025. This is in the most recent legislative session, whereby you can direct pay that dollar figure. So I'll give you an example of why this is important. We have some cities and towns that have, for example, $17 commitment, $100 commitment, $300 commitment. it's so low that realistically on the ground, we realize that, but they still you still want to participate to have that essentially wildfire insurance if something does happen, because maybe your neighbor across the fence has high risk and that could bleed into your area, into your jurisdiction. So instead of doing all the work to find an action, report on it, you can just cut a check. That's fine. And treat it like. For the bigger entities, we don't want that. We really want meaningful work done on the ground. So that's something that we implemented and will go into effect with the new agreement. The current agreement that all of you are signed up for expires the end of this year. So that direct pay will start with the new agreement 2025. Now, the question about direct payment that we receive often is, where's that money going? The state recently, I think it's 2 legislative sessions ago, created a fund called the Wildland Urban Interface Preparedness Prevention Mitigation Fund. I know, super fun. So acronym WIPM. Yeah, the WIPM Fund. And they put about $4 million into it through Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, with the intent that the division will put that money on the ground in local communities. As you know, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands has almost no land ourselves. Our job is to support the local communities in forest health practices. So the money that, if you decide to direct pay that amount, it's going to go into that same fund, administered the same as the money that comes from the state, which means most likely it probably won't go back directly into your town. It can go anywhere in the state because it's not separated by where it comes from. It'll go wherever the highest need in the state is. So that's direct pay. Couple other minor fixes. There's currently percentages where you have to do a minimum of 50% mitigation work. That means going and thinning trees, mowing roadways, reducing vegetation, essentially, that's at risk for wildfire. And then you can have a max of 25% in the preparedness category. Think of that as prevention and wildfire training. What we've discovered in administering this program is that while those are great ambitions, they don't work for every circumstance. So we're removing the percentages. You want to buy a fire engine, you can count all of that towards your participation commitment now. That'll just take cooperation with your local Forestry, Fire, State Lands representative. We're also uniting the reporting year. The other complaint we've heard from those who are actually reporting on this, which is usually your fire departments, is that it can be a challenge when the fiscal year hits in the middle of summer because their projects are lasting the whole summer. So we fixed that. All the reporting will be during calendar year, not fiscal year. And then another challenging thing we've encountered, our employees on the state side are so eager to help you, is sometimes they've just shouldered the entire administrative workload themselves. So you have a county fire warden who is doing all of the work, planning the mitigation projects, reporting those actions on behalf of the local entity. That really undermines the intent of the program. The intent is that everyone at the local level is taking a serious look at the wildfire risk and taking action at the local level. We don't want to assume that for you. We want to be able to support you on that effort, but we're going to stop allowing Forestry, Fire, and State Lands employees to do all of that work on the administrative level. They can still coach, support, help, but not actually plan and do the projects. Okay. I know I went through that really fast, but I know you got a long agenda. I really want to just give you a brief preview of some of these things and then open it up for questions. What questions or concerns do you have about CWS, Cooperative Wildfire System? Making my job easy. Got a hand? No? Okay. This is my contact information. Feel free to write it down. If you do have any questions, concerns, especially as you go back and talk to your people, your fire department or emergency managers, please hit me up. Like I said, my position is new. I'm here to support you in this. So please reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns moving forward. Okay, thank you. I'll let you do it. All right, we're getting up the other PowerPoint here, but thanks, Joseph, for being here. Appreciate that. Again, if anybody has questions or follow up as that, or if you realize later what was actually said, don't hesitate to reach out. Joseph put his contact information up there, but we can also help you out with that. So want to give you, last time we were here, and it has been a couple of months since the last time we were here. So good to see everybody here and good to see so many people here as well. I know we've got a lot in person and online. Yep, I will minimize that. There we go. All right. A couple of things I want to bring up. First one, Utah State Scenic Byway Committee is looking for someone to serve on that committee. It is a 4-year term. The governor appoints them, needs to be a municipal elected official. If you're interested or want more information about that, please reach out to Liam, grab him after, or shoot him an email, but just want to let you know that that one is out there. So this is not, sometimes there are positions that are appointed by the league. This is not one that is directly appointed by the league. This is one that the governor just appoints, but we do want to give some input or help out if somebody is interested in that. So just be aware, Utah Scenic Byway Committee does have an opening for a municipal elected official. So last time we met, we set up several advisory groups. Thanks to everybody that reached out, has participated in these. I just want to give you some updates of where we are on a few of these different advisory groups that we have. So first off, the Stormwater Committee has met a couple of times. Gone through the bill from last year, HB 507, and we've had a couple of back and forth meetings with the Home Builders Association, who is also working on this one. We have some new proposed language, so if you're on the Stormwater Committee and have not seen the proposed language, reach out to me and I can shoot that over to you. But we're going to be meeting sometime in the next week to review that language and then keep moving down the negotiations on that bill. So if you're on the Stormwater Committee or suddenly want to be on the Stormwater Committee, please reach out to me if you haven't seen that language or want to be involved. Second one, gravel. Critical infrastructure materials. Eric, I said that just for you. There's the study. There are two different things going on with this one. Two bills from last year that we're still kind of tracking this year is, first off, the study that came out of HB 502 from the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. That study has gotten underway. The company Stantec is the engineering firm that was contracted with to do the study. I know they have begun reaching out to cities, send out survey information, have begun to set up meetings to gather information. My ask on this one is, if you have been reached out to, if Stantec has reached out to you about the gravel study, please let me know. I'm just trying to get a handle on who they've reached out to, trying to track how many cities they're reaching out to so we can have an idea of what's happening with the study and where it's going. So Paul, Brigham City, you're covered. I know that you've kept me in the loop, but if Stantec reached out to you, let me know. I would just like to keep a handle on that one. Second track that's going on there is SB 72 from last year. We're meeting up on that one to start talking about it. We had internal discussions about that one. Just need to start meeting up with the folks on the other side of the bill. So Eric, I'm going to be talking to you right after this, but or we can just talk on Wednesday at the interim. But we'll be setting up some meetings to talk about that one as well. So we are still going down both tracks there, still talking about both bills from last year and those issues, but that one is ongoing. So if you have not been a part of the gravel meetings, if you'd like to jump in on that one, again, feel free to reach out and we'll get you in the loop. Another advisory group we set up was the UDOT coordination group.
We've done a couple things here. We had one meeting where we met internally to discuss some issues. We had a meeting with UDOT to discuss some of those specifics. And one of the big takeaways is that we need to work out how to coordinate better with the regional managers in UDOT. So the next steps with the UDOT coordination is for us to coordinate. I wish there was better words than that, but we're going to use it multiple times. To coordinate better with the regional managers. So look for further information about that one. If you're part of those UDOT groups, we're going to figure out how to coordinate better with those managers and see if we can streamline some of those systems or just figure out how to work better together there. With that one, Cam, I'm going to turn over to you to talk economic development, and then Molly, you'll be on deck to talk homelessness.
Howdy, everybody. Thank you for joining us both online and in person. Between online and in person, we have over 200 people. So thank you very much for making time. The bad news about summer coming to an end is school is back in session and the legislative session is around the corner. Good news, though, is that football season is less than 2 weeks away and the annual convention's less than 3 weeks away. There is a lot that's going to happen between now and the annual convention and the next time we meet as LPC on September 16th, including these advisory groups. I give you that context because when we get to some of the other topics, we're going to be asking you for some Slido feedback today. We actually have 9 Slido questions prepared for you. And then we'll be asking for volunteers for a couple additional work groups specifically focused on a couple of topics that will need to bring recommendations back for LPC when we next meet on September 16th. Speaking of the Economic Development Advisory Group, this group met once in June. And those of you who are on that group are wondering, did I miss a meeting since June? You haven't, because we were waiting for updates, some of which actually just came last week. On the alcohol proximity piece, this was actually an issue that arose with the cities of the first and second class caucus in the spring. And we followed up with our large city caucus around this alcohol proximity piece. When Carson comes up later to talk about research, we do have a research question that we've sent to several cities individually, but we'll open it up generally today about how state requirements on proximity for restaurants and other alcohol permittees to community locations, which are defined as schools or parks or churches, how that has impacted one way or the other economic development in your community. We have a meeting later this week with several key legislators in the alcohol space, and they're looking for specific examples of how those community proximity or the proximity to community locations language in state law has impacted economic development opportunities in your cities. So that'll be part of the follow-up homework for today. On the transportation utility fee, there still is a push by some at the Capitol just preempt the transportation utility fee altogether. We are still standing firm to the principles the league board adopted last year on the transportation utility fee. And then we told our advisory group in June that we were expecting some sort of proposal on the transportation utility fee that could carve out entities that don't pay property tax. So think churches and other nonprofit entities. We've made it clear that we think that's a terrible approach and undermines our fee authority in general. As of August 19th at 12:33 p.m., we still haven't seen anything yet, but stay tuned. And then on retail incentives, we had a meeting last week on this topic. There are some in the commercial real estate industry that would like to see some changes. We've relayed to House and Senate leadership, who were both heavily involved in that bill. Speaker Schultz was the House sponsor, and Senator Vickers, who's the Senate Majority Leader, was the Senate sponsor. And we've told them we stand by the policy of House Bill 151 and the agreement that we struck several years ago, but that there are potential areas of improvement to that bill. And what we've identified are the definitions around public infrastructure in that bill, as well as the definitions around the housing component, in large part because we used different definitions this past legislative session around the fizz and the hops than we did on the retail incentives bill. So we've said, if we're going to reopen this bill, let's try to have some consistency through all these different tools. And then the report, we're required to report to GOEO if you use retail incentives, and then those reports can be forwarded to the auditor's office, and the auditor's office can actually claw back incentives. And we've brought that up as that was one of our concerns several years ago, and that would be worth revisiting. So as of right now, there's no proposal on the table, but we had that meeting just last week. And so if your city is involved in any of these 3 topics and you want further details, just let us know. But that's the quick update, and we'll convene this group as necessary as the proposals come back. Molly.
Thanks, Cam. So as many of you know, because you were participating in them, the winter response plan work groups were meeting in counties of the first and second class. They all submitted their reports, and by now everyone has heard from OHS about the compliance of their reports. For background, last year it was established that counties of the first and second class needed to come up with plans for what they could do to make sure that people experiencing homelessness in their counties had access to resources in the winter. That was a time-based plan, so from October through April for a winter response plan, and then kind of an emergency temperature triggered policy for Code Blue. Counties of the first class, so Salt Lake County, needed to submit a winter response plan for the entire time, as well as a Code Blue response, which they did. Counties of the second class were given an option to either submit a winter response plan or at the request of Davis County, look at an actual long-term solution so that they could put their policy efforts into that, as well as Code Blue. And then counties of the third and fourth class are required to have Code Blue plan or Code Blue policies, but weren't required to submit plans to OHS. At this point, Utah and Washington counties' plans were deemed compliant. Davis, Salt Lake, and Weber County was deemed non-compliant. I want to note that this wasn't for lack of effort or lack of trying on any of these counties' parts. And I was able to meet with Wayne Niederhauser with OHS last week, and his message was that from this point on, if your county was found non-compliant, OHS's goal is to work with counties and the plans submitted to figure out how to make them compliant. So that's what we're looking at now. Preemption technically is on the table for non-compliant counties, but it doesn't sound like OHS has a huge appetite to come in and do that. They would much rather work with you and figure out how to make sure that adequate resources are available in your communities. As we look ahead, one thing that we do know is likely coming this legislative session is a code red, especially when we have, several days in the high 90s and 100s. It's also dangerous to be outside in the summer. And so making sure that there are adequate resources and shelter facilities available when that is the case. From there, though, we haven't heard a lot of policy whisperings of anything else likely impacting municipalities. It sounds like everything right now will likely be more on the service provision side of things. One other thing I will note, as we do look to long-term solutions, and we'll get to this as well in the future with some other bonds that are going up and issues that will be on the ballot, but Salt Lake County is looking to place a $507 million bond for overhauling their criminal justice and justice and accountability center, trying to figure out how to get folks who maybe have low-level criminal offenses, have some mental or behavioral health issues, able to get them access to services. That also will likely include 1,000 permanent supportive housing units. So that is likely to be out on the ballot, as well as folks are thinking towards long-term solutions. Are there any questions about any of this? If not, I know we have a stacked agenda and we can keep on moving. All right, thank you.
Hi again, I'm going to be up here for a few minutes, so I brought my water with me, and we got a lot to get through in the next few minutes here on USC mission on housing affordability. The UEOC, as we mentioned, is taking more of an approach focusing on the Olympics. They're also looking at large-scale economic development incentives, but the Commission on Housing Affordability is reporting back to the UEOC as well. The UEOC will next meet on Monday, September 16th, which is the morning of the next time we meet as LPC. So the next time we'll see this group in this body will be after the next UEOC meeting. Likewise, the Commission on Housing Affordability will next meet on September 3rd, the day before the annual convention. So we will be bringing back updates from that meeting to the convention on September 4th and September 5th. With that being said, let's just take a second to talk through kind of where all the different stakeholders are as of August 19th. So Governor Cox, you'll remember his goal from the legislative session of 35,000 starter homes in the next 5 years. I talked to Steve Waldrop on a very regular basis, including as recently as Friday afternoon. And he could tell you how many starter homes per day over the next 5 years that needs to get built in order to meet this goal. It's 0.8. And he's looking at an all of the above approach to achieve the goal. Second part of the slide is the Guiding Our Growth document. This was released last December, and the legislature is still looking at how do you take what residents said in Guiding Our Growth and implement it in state and local. In addition, just a couple of weeks ago, Governor Cox was announced as the co-chair of a national housing crisis task force. This is comprises 28 individuals from around the country, including some mayors. The governor is a co-chair along with the mayor of Cleveland, the mayor of Atlanta, and someone who's a consultant in this space. So we bring this up in that the overall issue, even though we get asked all the time, like, are we still talking about housing, land use? And the answer is, well, yes. Because one, it's still a challenge on the ground for many Utahns. And two, you can see Governor Cox personally has leaned into this approach. Second thing, Property Rights Coalition, which consists of the realtors, the builders, and other stakeholders in that arena, have made several proposals to the Commission on Housing Affordability. Well, I'll come back to those in a second. And then the Political Subdivisions Interim Committee has prioritized these 3 topics that they will be discussing at interim this Wednesday: impact fees, potential next steps around last year's housing audit, and definitions around exactions. Meanwhile, other groups, and we've listed 5 of them here, have all either issued reports recently or hosting events around housing. And there's an event tomorrow that the Urban Land Institute is hosting where they have a speaker who wrote the book, How Zoning Broke America, and he'll be presenting tomorrow to a group of stakeholders around the state. We'll have someone there listening. So again, just gives you a sense of what the overall environment is. Last spring in 2023, the League Board of Directors adopted these core principles for our advocacy within the CHA and the UEOC, focused on quality of life, sustainability of infrastructure, and will the proposal result in units that are more directly affordable or result in more home ownership? And we drive these points home in every meeting. And when I say we, it's not just league staff. Within the Commission on Housing Affordability, there are several work groups. So I want to publicly thank Harriman Mayor Lauren Palmer, who's representing the league in one of those work groups. Springdale Mayor Barbara Bruno, who represents the league in one of those work groups. Mill Creek Mayor Jeff Silvestrini, who represents the league in both work groups. Sandy City Attorney Lynn Pace, who represents the league in a couple of work groups. Orem Councilmember Tom McDonald, Salt Lake City Senior Advisor Andrew Johnston, and Salt Lake City RDA Director Danny Walsh. All 3 of them represent the league in the different work groups, in addition to league staff. So these work groups have been meeting throughout the interim. And what we have passed out in the back, and hopefully they'll be sharing on the screen when we get to it, is a chart to try to help you track where all the different pieces are and whether they're at the Commission on Housing Affordability or if they're coming from different groups. The color coding is that the navy blue is the league board principle. The gray is what's coming to us from other groups, whether that's the governor's 35,000 starter home initiative or the concepts from the Property Rights Coalition, or in light blue, concepts that we have been bringing forward through those different subgroups, all of which are based on the core principles. So we tried to organize everything around our core principles rather than organizing everything around all the different topics. And this is still just a fraction of all of the topics that are being discussed under the umbrella of the Commission on Housing Affordability. So thank you to our reps who have been attending those meetings. And we have meetings later this week with those subgroups after interim, where they will be actually expecting a counter proposal from us on the parking piece. So let me come back to the parking piece just so everybody can see. This is what has been proposed by the Property Rights Coalition on parking. If you've got your handout in front of you, we're looking at the second column over where it starts PRC action one proposed, reduce zoning requirements that hinder the production of starter homes, including parking and garage requirements. And then what you'll see here on the screen are the nuts and bolts of their proposal: a standardized parking stall size in state law for residential areas, counting tandem as 2 spots, can't require garages or carports, and then a single family house equals 2 parking spots only. This proposal to the LPC advisory group a couple of weeks ago, we surveyed them and then got some good feedback from them. We then took that feedback to the League Board of Directors last Monday, and then we built out a concept that we're going to present to you today to get your feedback, with the caveat that the child subgroup's expecting a response from us this Thursday. Okay, so that's the quick background, and we can come back to the other ones momentarily. Now, one of the comments that has come up repeatedly as we've talked to League members over the last few months is a sense of frustration that you and your cities are not seeing the private sector bring plans to you that actually are starter homes. That when you're seeing rezones requests come to you, they're not for starter homes, they're for luxury homes, they're for multifamily, they're or multifamily rentals or other things. They're not for starter homes. So at the board meeting last week, we had a couple of board members who said, if there are proposals out there, we'd like to see them. So we tracked down one that we're going to share as an example. We're not weighing in on whether this particular project should move forward where it's proposed, but just to give you an example of some of the projects that are going forward. This is a project that's being proposed in unincorporated Weaver County. So it's in between a couple of cities in West Weaver County. They also presented this of what they're trying to accomplish. So you'll see there's a mix of housing units. You've got some that are like the bottom corner is the 2-story, 2-car garage, but the next to it is a smaller footprint, smaller unit with a garage in the back. And then there are other units that don't have garages yet at all, but there is space to build a garage in the back at some point. So this is part of the architectural renderings of what these units could look like, and to have a variety of housing types within the neighborhood, but having some of these smaller units that you'll notice here have an owner occupancy deed restriction component. So for this particular project, they've presented to the county commission that they would deed restrict units. They've been working with the county of what that looks like. As of last report, they were looking at a 10-year deed restriction for owner occupancy, and there would be an affordability component to it as well. And this project would qualify for House Bill 572 funding from last session, which requires a certain percentage of units be deed restricted and affordable in order to qualify for those state dollars. In this particular project, you've got the owner occupancy deed restriction, the housing integration and the like, and they're shooting for price points between $340 and $400, depending on the type of housing unit you're looking at. So again, at the League board meeting last Monday, several board members asked, are there projects out there right now in the starter home space? This is one that we wanted to share, and you'll notice this is also in the starter home as a single family detached unit rather than starting home as a condo or a townhome. And Governor Cox's primary focus has been single family detached as starter homes. Steve Waldrop recognizes that, yes, starter homes come in all shapes and sizes, but for this particular purpose, we wanted to give you this example. Okay, before I open up Slido, let me just pause there and ask if there are any questions about what I just showed you from Nielsen Homes. Let's go to Mayor Zoltansky, or if there are any other questions about the overall context of where things are at on the Commission on Housing Affordability before we open it up for deliberation. Mayor Z.
Cameron, what's the lot size that they're proposing?
Yeah,
Units per
so Mayor
acre.
Zoltansky asked about what the lot size is. That's in the presentation that I did not copy over to this presentation, and so it depends. In order to qualify for some of the other funding, they need to hit a density of at least 6 units to the acre for the project that receives the funding. Does it? Yeah, it doesn't show exactly what the lot size is here, but in my conversations with them, they were trying to hit that 6 unit to the acre overall density, so.
I think if they could
Mary
fit
Trana's
it-
hand up, she may know, but I don't know the exact specifics. Berg, so Mary Tran had a question about deed restriction. Anything else, Mary Zoltansky? Yeah, it's given like there, and then I'll come to Mary Tran's question on deed restriction.
If they could achieve this under 400,000, people will pay more for tiny homes in certain neighborhoods than this. So this is very encouraging. It's exciting.
Yeah. How many units? That I can't answer. So this area again is in unincorporated Weber County. It was originally zoned for 500 some odd units. Part of the zoning or the rezone request was to up the overall number of units to 1,001, of which 275 were going to qualify for the deed restriction piece. So that's where my objective here is not to weigh in one way or the other on this specific project, but to answer the question that came up at our board meeting last week, which is anybody out there proposing these types of starter homes? This is one example of that. And I know it's one that Steve Waldrop's watching closely and Governor Cox is watching closely. So that's why we wanted to make folks aware. So coming to Mary Tran's question on the deed restriction piece, that's also still being worked out. You'll see that they're proposing to set up an HOA, but I don't think the HOA would be doing the deed restriction. I think it would actually be the county, but they're still working out, would it be the county itself or would it be a housing authority or something else? In fact, 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting with a bunch of Weber County leaders. Tom Hansen from Washington Terrace was there. Looking around to see if there's anybody else in the room who was in that particular meeting. Tom, I've not seen anybody who's in the room per se, but the whole focus was this conversation about how to do the deed restriction, and the state of Utah is interested in having the conversation of whether the state could extend that expertise and capacity. That's not a commitment, but they're open to that conversation. Let's go, Andrew, and then Todd. Tom, is there anything you'd want to add on that or didn't? No, okay. Andrew?
Cam, you mentioned that this bill ties in with HB 572, which
Yep.
if I remember correctly is the Treasurer Investment Fund. And I guess my question here is, are you saying that this proposed development is made possible by the policies that were adopted by the legislature in negotiation with the league? That's why this one is relevant for our purposes today?
Two answers to that. Answer number one is yes, the House Bill 572 funding is making this project possible. And that it was part of the negotiations. Steve Waldrop came to LPC several times, presented, and when you look at this handy dandy sheet, what's listed in white is what happened last session, and House Bill 572 is referenced there. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is you're seeing a lot of focus at the Capitol right now around small lots. Part of our argument back is that small lots in and of themselves don't equate to affordability or owner occupancy. You need a combination of small units and potentially deed restrictions in order to truly meet that objective of affordability and owner occupancy. But here's an example of a proposal that is bringing in deed restrictions, small units, small lots, affordability, and owner occupancy. And so it's situational awareness, if nothing else, is important for folks to know. Okay, Carson's got a question online before we pivot over to Slido.
Thank you. There's a couple questions online about the threshold for affordability. First, whether that meets the need at that 300,000 range, and then what guarantees there are on keeping that price low for the first time buyer
Sure.
when they actually purchase it.
Sure, good questions. Again, I don't want to litigate one way or the other the specific project under consideration. So I'm going to keep my answer to that at the state policy level. At the state policy level, House Bill 572 requires that if a qualifying builder is going to qualify for those dollars, that 60% of the units have to be quote unquote starter homes, which is defined around owner occupancy and affordability. The state policy is the floor, not the ceiling. So the floor in state policy from this past legislative session with 572, as well as the other ones we've highlighted in the handout, all start at 5 years owner occupancy with likely a deed restriction, 5 years plus 80% of either area median income or 80% of the median sell price, depending on which tool you're looking at. So that is a floor, not a ceiling. So as a local government and a builder are working out potential project, in the case of Weaver County, I know they wanted to go beyond 5 years, so they were looking at 10. But again, the state policy piece is just a floor. So the policy question that the people asked of, is that enough? That's
bedrooms, maybe 3 bedrooms. That's not a great value, and they're not going to be able to get that value out of it, especially. Anyway, just it's the economic question that still plagues me. They're increasing the cost per square foot to build these smaller products and to get more of them into the market. By a policy that we're using Treasury funds to help subsidize, it still doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. So just throwing that out there for everyone to kind of chew on a little bit. I'm not sure it's still a great value.
perfect. Okay, I'm going to move on from that to now the Slido questions. The first question is related to this type of product because, again, it's a type of product Steve Waldrop has kept or had a very keen eye on. If a property owner requested a rezone to build this type of product, small units mixed with bigger units, on-site parking, no garages, etc., with some small units deed restricted to ensure affordability and home ownership, would this type of development fit somewhere in your city? Now, Carson, we are not showing results for Slido questions today, correct? It's not supposed to. Again, we have 9 total Slido questions to get through in the next 30-ish minutes. And because we're in active deliberations on most of these topics, we did not want to show the results. We wanted you to be able to give us the feedback, and then we can take back to our negotiators. Okay. So can you turn that off, or do I need to go back? Okay. So it's okay for this one, you can put your comments in, but for the next ones, when we get into the negotiations, that would be helpful. Okay. So can you just minimize it so that would? Yeah. Perfect. As Carson is turning that setting off, sorry, I should have asked you before we open that up. But as Carson's turning that setting off, are there any questions about this document? Because once we finish this Slido question, we'll pivot into some additional Slido questions. Let's go, Mayor Zoltansky.
I have one more question about the proposal.
Um,
Can we talk about the 10-year term? That doesn't seem like a very long term to be deed restricted. If it were longer, it could reduce the risk of profiteering or speculation, also stabilizing neighborhoods for longer term stable, denser neighborhoods. A problem with density that we often hear complaints about is it's so transitional. People aren't really don't have the time to engage with their community and build community. Some projects around the country have 99-year deed restrictions. So if you qualify for affordability and density, you can have basically a life estate or deed it to, or it passes through your estate for up to 99 years. Where's the 10 years from?
So again, the 10 years is what the Weaver County Commission is working on with the builder. So I don't know I'm not privy to those particular conversations. I think you raised good policy points about why a longer deed restriction would make more sense. And again, as we were negotiating last year's bills around the requirements on owner occupancy and affordability, we ended up at 5 year as the floor rather than a ceiling that you could then negotiate if a project like this was coming forward in your city. Okay, we ready to rock?
I just want to test really quick.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna exit. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that initial feedback on Slido question number 1. So keep your Slido fingers ready because how do we get back to the PowerPoint? Or you just get us back to PowerPoint. Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there's within the Commission on Housing Affordability, there's a parking proposal on the table to standardize parking requirements in all residential areas. And I mentioned the Mayor Silvestrini and Councilmember McDonald from Orem and Mayor Palmer from Harriman, Lynn Pace from Sandy, and I have all been involved in these meetings. And we are constantly in every one of those conversations asking, where's the nexus back to affordability and owner occupancy? We presented those PRC proposals to our LPC advisory group 2 weeks ago, and there was some interesting feedback. One, folks were very concerned about those proposals as drafted, so that's not a surprise. But second, that advisory group, which has several dozen local government folks on there, 85% of that advisory group via Slido, 85% said they were willing to, as a city, reduce certain parking and garage requirements so long as it was tied directly to owner occupancy. 70% said they were willing to reduce if it was tied directly to affordability. So a strong majority of the advisory group said, we're willing to make some changes on our side on the parking and garage, but it has to be tied back to affordability, it has to be tied back to owner occupancy. So based on that feedback, we went to the league board last week and outlined all the survey results, got some feedback from the board, and then what we've put together here for you to consider is what we would, based on the feedback today, plan to take back to the Commission on Housing Affordability on Thursday. So there are going to be several parts to this. And we're going to take Slido today, and then we're going to ask for your feedback from your city by close of business tomorrow. So you've got time to go back to City Hall and get us any additional feedback. So part number 1 would be the affordable homeownership nexus. And we use the same definitions as were used in last year's bills of House Bill 572, SB 168, and SB 268 around affordability and owner occupied. And then would say a city may not impose a requirement for garage or carport on a 1 or 2 family dwelling. Okay, so this would not apply in the multifamily setting that is owner occupied and affordable as defined in the section, but it would not limit our ability to still require on-site parking. So essentially saying, if it's going to be deed restricted, owner occupied, deed restricted, affordable, then the city can't require the garage or carport, but we can require the on-site parking. Okay, that's the concept under part 1. Part 2, this came out of a discussion with the league board actually a few months ago, where the question was, if a city requires the garage, should the city count the garage toward the parking minimum? And we had several examples of where cities were requiring a garage, but then not counting the garage toward the minimum and requiring additional parking spots. So part 2 would be, if the city requires the garage or carport, then you have to count the spots toward the minimum, which then leads to a question about determining parking stall size. So what we've put here for your consideration would be an uncovered driveway spot and a covered driveway spot, having 2 different definitions rather than one definition to rule them all. And then that also leads to a question about tandem parking, the back to front parking of, and this should have been in italicized as well, but it counts as part 2 spots for a 1 or 2 family dwelling if these conditions are met. Owner occupied, affordable, meets certain size. It's accessible by vehicle without any structural impediments. Nathan from Harriman had brought this point up during LPC during last legislative session about what happens if there's a structural impediment like a staircase or other things that makes it impossible to use. And then also clarifying that the housing unit would not include an IADU or a short-term rental, so that it's truly trying to get to that affordability owner occupied piece. So I know I just threw a lot at you, but this is our attempt based on the feedback from the advisory group and the league board to come up with something that our representatives can take back to the CHA on Thursday. Okay, let me ask we're gonna go to Slido so we can get as much feedback as possible. Are there any questions clarifying questions about part one of the affordability, owner occupied and the requirement, or parts 2, 3, and 4 that anybody wants to ask now? Any clarifying questions before we open it up to Slido for your feedback? Let's go, Councilmember Shumway. Oh. Okay. So 4D, the housing unit does not include an internal accessory dwelling unit, short-term rental, fractional ownership. So this was an effort to say, if you're using this unit, if you have a second family living in the same unit, then that makes tandem, it almost guarantees that the tandem spills over into the street because you've got a landlord renter relationship in the tandem spot. So it almost inevitably spills over. And you'll note, coming back to the handout here, we've highlighted kind of the policy trade-off in general is that if a city doesn't require garages, cities likely face more code enforcement, public safety, and parking spillover challenges, which we would need to mitigate. That's the reality that many of your cities have experienced. In fact, Clinton City sent us a great video on Friday that do we want to risk the IT of trying to pull it up? The council member, the plan was to show it today if the IT worked. So that's all right. Don't. This has a video. Okay. So thank you, Councilmember Doherty, for sending this over to us last week. But this was a fascinating case study of tandem parking combined with narrow roads, no sidewalks. There's not supposed to be audio with it. So I actually showed this video to my wife the other night without giving her context about why I wanted her to watch it. And her response was, that looks like a terrible place to live. Oh. So Councilor Doherty from Clinton, who sent me the video, said she lived here 20 years ago. It's why she's obsessed with this area. And this was really tragic. Like so I'll let people read through it. Perfect. Great, it worked. So I think we can all agree, like, there are some major planning flaws and outcomes from that, that's not what we want here, right? What we've tried to do based on your feedback with what's highlighted here is to tie things back to owner occupied affordability, still be able to require that on-site parking, but then recognize there may be other things we'll need to mitigate, and we'll have a question about that in a second. So any other clarifying questions? Let's go Dave, South Weaver, and then question online.
On 4A specifically identifies owner occupied affordable housing. For all of these definitions and requirements, are they only for the starter homes affordable housing, or will these be across all housing types?
Yeah, great question, David. We were trying to tie it back to the starter home piece, because here's kind of the political context of the Capitol. That's why I told you about where, the governor's on the national task force, and I have all these different groups that are releasing reports talking about, small lots. There's still this huge appetite at the Capitol to say, we as the state should step in and preempt cities, because cities are the reason why starter homes aren't getting built. And Mark brought up the economic piece, but there's an even bigger economic piece around why starter homes aren't getting built. And that's because ultimately you can make more money by building other types of housing than you can with starter homes. So I think there's a political piece for us to say, we don't want to be cast as the reason why starter homes aren't getting built. And so if there's a way to say, okay, if garages are viewed as a reason why starter homes aren't getting built, then we're willing to come to the table if that will actually help get starter homes built in this context. That's the underlying concept. I think I saw it. Let's go, Nathan. And then I'm going to open up Slido to start to get feedback. Well, actually, before you go, Nathan, we'll have two questions on Slido. We're asking your comfort and concern level based on what we just described. And then we'll have an open-ended question for you to provide additional thoughts. And again, this will all be, it's all behind the firewall, so we'll be able to see it. But again, we have, Thursdays when we're supposed to bring back a counter to what the PRC's put out. Nathan.
So as a city, through one of our MDAs, we just entitled something called the medium density small lot. Like 2,500 square foot lots, single family detached. Garages are not required, essentially pulling all the levers to call the legislators bluff. And those homes will start at 550. We can't do anything, everything on that list. We said, go ahead and do it. And they're telling us it's $550,000.
Yep.
So I don't know what else we're supposed to do, but I think we should be telling that story. Even if we pull all the levers, it is a market-driven decision by the builders. And they're going to charge whatever they can get regardless. It's not an input issue. It is what's the market going to bear.
Yeah, great point, Nathan. And I've already asked Mayor Palmer to be ready to share that example at the CHA when we meet later this week. So let's come up here to Jordan. And then this question is up, so you can be filling out this question. In a moment, I'll move to the open-ended question so you can provide additional feedback. So Jordan.
To that point, we had the home builders did a luncheon, and it was an hour straight of them pointing fingers at the cities and saying that this is all our fault. So one thing we did to regain the narrative, our Washington County Mayors Association, every mayor in the county got together and we did a panel discussion, and each city had a one-pager showing exactly what the cities have done to facilitate affordable housing. And we had builders, contractors, elected officials, the media. We rented the auditorium up at Dixie Technical College, and all of our mayors participated. And we wanted to say, look at what we have done. We are continuing to work. We're continuing to change our zoning, our lot sizes, our impact fees. We're doing everything we can. The builders, you need to do your part. And so it was a really good experience, a good event, and I encourage other cities to maybe do the same thing to regain that narrative.
Well, and to that end, Jordan, at annual in a couple of weeks, we'll be distributing like a template to help you have those types of conversations with legislators. So stay tuned to that. We'll be distributing that in mass. And your event was tremendous. I missed it, but Justin was there and said it was fantastic. Okay, let's go Mayor Alder. And then I think it was Dave who had his hand up. Yeah.
I'd like to see the league do something to help us not only help brand new homes, but if the builders want to build the higher end homes, why don't we help people who are buying a first home, but it's a used home? So how are we helping those folks so that we can do backfill?
Yeah. So it's on the chart. So I'll come put a pin in it. I'll come back to it once we get off of this issue, and I'm going to make a note to make sure we come back to it.
We were speaking to a committee we set up, and there was a loan officer on the committee and another person who worked for a mortgage company. And they said for a first-time home buyer, if they can get if they can also get an internal accessory dwelling unit out of it, that really helps them get their second home, because the rent from that helps them to get another 75% of whatever that annual rent is. They can count 75% of that toward their new down payment or what they can qualify for. And that was an eye opener to us, that could really help these moderate income families if they can have internal accessory dwelling units.
Well, it's an excellent point. And since you brought up accessory dwelling units, I want to give a shout out to Farmington for a really unique approach that Farmington City has taken in ordinance to try to convert external accessory dwelling units into an actual owner occupied product. Did I describe that succinctly enough?
Yes.
So a very unique approach in Farmington that I believe you're going to be presenting on at the conference next month, right?
Yes, we will. Right.
Yep. So file that away too. Okay, this is open it. So the question, well, yeah, Liam, will you to bring it over to Jordan? And so Mayor Alder's question for those online is what was the outcome from the June event that the cities in Washington County held?
Yeah, we left a challenge to the builders saying, we're willing and ready to work with you, bring us projects that can solve some of these issues. And it's in the early stages, but we do have a project that has come forward to Washington City that wants to build homes with a $350,000 price point. And so we're in early talks with that developer, and hopefully it's fruitful.
Mhm.
I might just add, I'm a councilman in Washington City. And might just want to add that I don't know if anyone else felt uncomfortable last year after the session, how a lot of fingers were pointed at the cities from the state. What we wanted to do in having this event that Jordan explained is to say, we're doing everything we can, but you really have the ability to really solve it. So how badly do you want to solve it? But it was productive, and it kind of changed the narrative to a place that I think now that everyone can move forward rather than pointing fingers, realizing that we all have things that we can do.
Perfect. Thank you, council member. And I love the fact, this is one of the best things about working at the league is you've got the mayor of Providence, council member in Washington, 5.5 hours plus away from each other, having this sort of dialogue. So awesome. So thank you both for making the trek. Okay, I've got this question open. We'll leave this open for another 30 seconds or so for just additional feedback, knowing that Mayor Palmer and Mayor Silvestrini and Councilmember McDonald, Lynn Pace and I have to respond at the CHA on Thursday. So we'll leave this open for a little bit longer if you have any other additional feedback, and then Carson will get to the homework at the end of the meeting. But if you think of additional feedback, we'll be taking feedback on what we just presented through tomorrow evening. So we still have Wednesday to aggregate it and be ready for our Thursday meeting. Okay. All right. I'm going to pivot now to Land Use Task Force Act, but I told Mayor Alder I'd come back to it. So if you look at your handy dandy chart, if there's a way to share screen share on the chart online, I'm going to address Mayor Alder's point and give you just a quick update on a few other pieces in the CHA that are still very much in process. So under the first column here, you'll see CHA Action 1, utilize publicly owned land for affordable owner-occupied housing units. Lots of discussion around what this could actually look like. And when we say publicly owned land, there are several bills in Congress looking at trying to utilize federally owned land for housing, but the focus at the CHA has been state-owned land, county, school district, city, SITLA, et cetera. Talked to Steve Waldrop about this on Friday, and we thought as of until last week that there was just going to be an insurmountable hurdle around the data collection and being able to do some inventories because of the tax commission. But Commissioner Valentine reported back to Steve Waldrop last week that he thought he had a path forward to be able to share data about publicly owned real estate that they could inform the next questions around how you plan for these types of publicly owned assets. So there's going to be a meeting in the next couple of weeks with Commissioner Valentine to walk through that. That's all I know right now, but just stay tuned. So we're working closely on that, and it overlaps with the Your Land, Your Plan initiative that the league's had for the last couple of years. You'll then see ULCT Action 1 proposed, removing barriers to condos. We've had a work group really doing a deep dive there. ULCT Action 2, still working on the best option. We've titled this Disincentivize Corporate Owned Housing. This includes everything from short-term vacation rentals to potential vacancy tax or land use regulations that incentivize owner occupancy. So we're still working on that best option. We don't have anything yet to present to you. ULCT Action 3 gets to what Mayor Alder has brought up, and this is something we've heard over and over and over again. Mayor Zeltansky's brought this up in Sandy. Mayor Nadolsky's brought this up in Ogden. I mean, I've probably heard this from 20 cities over the course of the last little while around the first-time homebuyer assistance to existing units. Mayor Burton has the scar tissue from last December when he made this pitch face-to-face to Governor Cox, and the governor rejected it. Since then, there's been an acknowledgement that for certain types of existing housing units, maybe they should look at this program and extending eligibility there. It's still an uphill climb, but it's something we've brought up in every meeting. And then ULCT Action 4, some we've talked about the advisory group, but it's making tweaks to moderate income housing plans and having a safe harbor type element there, and a safe harbor that's focused on outcomes that have shown to increase affordable home ownership opportunities. So know that there's still a lot of moving pieces there. I'm going to now pivot away from that first column to move to that second column, because last week we sat down with the Property Rights Coalition through the Land Use Task Force, and we got some proposals from them that we saw for the first time last week. And we don't have time today to do a deep dive on either of these two, but they're both very time sensitive. So what we're requesting is if there's anybody in your cities that you would like to be involved in conversations around bonding or impact fees. Jared Tingey's out sick today. That's not the only reason why we're volunteering him. He is aware. He was running point on these issues anyway. It just so happens that I'm pinch hitting for him to present. On the bonding piece, you can see we've been very clear with our objective, and I want to thank Clint Drake from Layton and Ryan Luce from South Jordan, Sean Guzman from St. George, and others who were on the call last week, Todd from Harriman, who all talked about some of the horror stories that cities have had trying to get infrastructure built through calling surety bonds. The PRC's objective has been they want to use surety bonds because they've reduced their costs for installing the infrastructure compared to other types of assurances. So they outlined a proposal last week. These are the three biggest fish from it, but there are a lot of little fish there as well. So if your city wants to be involved in the bonding piece, let Jared know directly or grab league staff. We need to have something to bring back to LPC next month. Likewise, on impact fees, political subdivisions is looking at impact fees in a couple of days. We received a draft proposal last week. Craig Call, the former property rights ombudsman, his firm reviewed all 206 impact fee reports from last year at the auditor's office. And as a result of that review, came back with several recommendations that he thought the legislature should look at, and the political subdivisions committee is interested in some of those pieces. Again, last week, our objective was just to understand the problems they were trying to solve and asked a ton of questions, but this will need a deeper dive. So if your city is interested in the impact fee piece, let Jared know, let any of us know, and we've, time sensitive to work through those proposals. Okay, this is one that's come to us from other cities, but actually dovetails to what we were just talking about mitigating some of the potential impacts if you have neighborhoods that don't have a lot of garages. And looking around this room, I can see several of your cities, Taylorsville, we've had this conversation, and others where you have a lot of neighborhoods that don't have garages, and ensuing challenges around code enforcement, parking planning, and public safety and the like. So we've had several cities who have brought this concept to us of getting state authorization to allow us, the political subdivision, to file a lien on any unpaid utilities on the property tax. So what we would like to know is how high of a priority would this be in your city? So again, using the property tax or you could file a lien on, it says on the property through the property tax for the utilities being provided. That's current law. Our proposal would be to allow the city to file a lien for unpaid utilities. Okay. So for your city, is this a high priority, medium priority, low priority, no priority at all? Because this will help us as we're having the conversations elsewhere around code enforcement. So we'll leave this open for a second so that you can do it. I'll leave it open for about 30 more seconds because this is a pretty easy question. Carson, if I advance, can they still fill it out? By the way, I'm going to advance. Yep. Okay, great. Okay. Another thing came up land use task force meeting last week and is in the plan review space. Home builders raising a question of when does the 14 days in statute begin? And there is an acknowledgement that it should begin once an application is found to be complete, within how much time should a city take in determining whether an application is complete? And then should the city provide notice and other things? So you can see the quick summary here. We're going to open this up for Slido in a second as well. We've had some cities who said, hey, we're open to this conversation. We have other cities who said, no, we don't want to reopen this conversation, concerned about state law requiring us to do the work for the applicants. So again, trying to get a sense of where the larger group is. This is a conversation that the home builders have been having with the building officials and with the building inspectors through UABO. We have league staff that is now attending those meetings, and we've told UABO, which is the association building officials, we've told them basically stop moving forward in those conversations until we get a sense from the larger league membership if kind of where our folks would like to go on this. So again, this would be, how do you feel about a proposal that would require cities to review building applications for completeness within a specific time frame? So this would be before the 14-day shot clock begins. Carson, I see comments in the chat room, but I assume you're monitoring those. Okay. And we did say we're going to 145 today, right? I'm going as fast as I can, but okay, moving on. One issue we've heard from you folks over the last few months too, is a frustration of having to re-inspect, re-review plans. So we want to know how many of your cities right now are charging an additional fee for a reinspection reinspection or a re-review of planning. This is something we've actually had several legislators who we've engaged with who said they thought it made sense that cities should be charging more if a builder is constantly asking for or is not getting it right at the first time. So as a result, we just want to get a sense of how many cities are already doing this. Councilmember Ivy, just wait 1 second, just bring in the mic. Just for our folks online, we have 133 online.
Just wondering, does this also apply when inspector shows up and the project is not ready for the inspection?
So great question and that's actually what we'd like to know from you. How does Washington City handle that? We've heard different things from different communities that sometimes the inspector will just reschedule their own spot. Sometimes they wait and sometimes they'll say, well, I was here within my 3 days. You weren't ready. You'll have to start over. And that's where we're trying to get a better sense of what's happening on the ground there. Okay, we've got a good cross section of responses here. Okay, and then this is the catch-all, because I just hit you with a lot of stuff on plan review timing, fees, inspections. I can tell you there are some legislators who are already looking at what we've referred to as SB 185 2.0. As a reminder, SB 185 is the bill last year that would have allowed a builder to hire their own inspector. And we fought the worst parts of that bill off. So even though a bill passed, it did not include that provision. It did require cities to enter into interlocal agreements to make sure you had inspectors available. What we've heard, and we're trying to do some follow-up data collection on this, is that some cities have not yet done those interlocal agreements. So if your city has not yet done so, that becomes the anecdote that then hurts every other city. So we're working through building out that list so we can follow up with your city and say, did you know your city has not yet done this? And that's being used against all cities at the Capitol. The other thing I'll note on SB 185 is that we fought off that provision about builders hiring their own inspectors. And one of our arguments was, we don't know of anywhere in the country where state law has authorized this. Well, never let a moment go to waste, never let a crisis go to waste. Our good friends in Tennessee, the Tennessee legislature just passed legislation last month over the opposition of the Tennessee League of Cities to allow builders to hire their own inspectors, their own building projects. And it was part of their initiative to make housing more affordable and attainable. So again, just making situational awareness of what's been going on this summer around the country. So if you have other feedback on plan review timing, fees, inspections, you can put it in here or send it back to us. Okay, next up, identical plans. We actually talked about this briefly in May, and then our advisory groups had a couple of really good conversations on this. State law right now has a definition for identical plans. State law right now actually requires cities to charge a nominal fee for the review of identical floor plans, which is different than identical plans. So that in of itself needs to be fixed in state law because we have two different definitions trying to accomplish the same thing. Home builders are basically trying to have a card file system, which some cities, I know Mark in Saratoga, you guys have a card file system or whatever the modern version of it is in 2024. I remember a library card because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, but my kids will have no idea what a the card file thing is at a library. But we've gotten good feedback about how do you actually ensure something is identical? What should a nominal fee actually look like? And then can you expedite a process for identical plans? State law right now does not require an expedited process. They're asking for one. And our advisory group say, yeah, we're open to this if we get the definitions right. So one quick question we have is, does your city already have a separate process in place to review identical plans for single family residential buildings? And so in other words, are you already doing in your city what the builders have raised within the CHA? And it's okay if you say you're uncertain, because that, again, is part of the data collection, trying to figure out what's already happening out there. So I'll leave this question open for a moment. Basically, once I get into the 70s, I'll move on.
Cameron, we have to go
Robert.
back to the reinspection. You don't need to take the slide back to there. But as a contractor, I have never been in a city where I've been charged a reinspection fee or a replan submittal fee. And I think that would be bad on the city's part to do that, because already contractors claim that inspectors are looking for reasons to turn it down. And if they started charging a fee, they would start saying they're turning it down just to charge that extra money to do that. So I would be very cautious on doing something like that.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mayor Burton, because the last thing you want is to create a narrative that is unfavorable to us when that's in actuality the problem we're trying to solve is applicants bringing incomplete plans to us, incomplete applications to us, or buildings that aren't ready, right? Like that's the real issue. So it could be a reinspection fee, or it could be that there's a separate time frame. And we did this with subdivisions a couple of years ago. I see hand in the back. Right, okay, hand in the back. But what we did on the subdivisions law a couple of years ago was to say, here's the shot clock that applies to cities, but that shot clock also applied to the developers. And if the developers didn't meet their shot clock, then we got more time to respond to that. So we were trying to incentivize the responsible application. But yeah, great point. Hand in the back, Councilmember Bradshaw.
I'm caveating this, but I don't have my city manager here today to ask this question. So it might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Some of us have slope ordinances and hillside issues or soil conditions issues. So help me understand if someone was building a very large subdivision and part of it might be on a part of their property with really easy peasy slope or soil conditions, and then the same home or townhouse or whatever they're building, but it might be in a different part that had some slope or soil conditions issues. How would this idea of one plan review impact our ability to look at those actual site conditions?
It's an excellent question. Because
I'm so glad you think so.
Yes, because it does come back to what does identical mean, and then what what are those other factors? So state law right now, when it defines identical, actually references geologic and meteorologic reasons that distinguish between two different types of units. So you could have a subdivision, and North Salt Lake actually brought this up in our call last week. You could have a subdivision where part of the subdivision's on the flat land and some of the subdivisions on the slope. The floor plan might be the same, but they are not identical because of the geological conditions. So under state law right now, that would not count as identical. Okay, and then I think Yeah, this is our last Slido question. This has been terrific. We appreciate all your feedback. Last Slido question. And it gets to Kate's point. How comfortable would you be to further define identical plans as those that are structurally identical, but may have minor changes unrelated to health, safety, or welfare? So the explanation I just gave Kate is spot on here. We already have a definition in state code that says if the geologic conditions are different, then they're not identical. So kind of in addition to those pieces, one thing that state law is silent on right now is whether something can be substantially identical if it has non-structural changes. Like the example that was given was you have a bathroom and you have the sink on one side of the bathroom here, and then another unit have the sink on the other side of the bathroom here, or you have a railing for the staircase here and a half wall in another one. So they're not structural pieces, but it's more than just the floor plan. State law right now defines identical plans as substantially identical. And then the attorneys in the room are already thinking like, what does substantially identical mean? And that's the trick. So we're trying to figure out is, do we lean into the structural piece to help identify substantially? And this was the point that came out of our meeting last week that we wanted to bring to a larger group for feedback. And we had offered to work on a proposal in this space, but we wanted to get thoughts on the structural piece here. Okay, I'll leave this open for about 30 more seconds. As people are filling that out, I'll just finish up on the chart. We have now rapid fire walked you through almost everything that is before the CHA, with the exception of PRC Action 2, which would be increased residential density by state law, either by upzoning everything or allowing external ADUs by right. So there is a proposal floating out there that's been referred to as the +1+4, that you would increase every residential area in the state by 1 unit or up to 4 units. And we've said absolutely no to that proposal, but just know that that's out there and we need to stay vigilant, and that just undermines all principles of good planning to have just a massive state upzone like that. But we have seen state upzones similar to that in quite a few states in the last couple of years. Other than that, I think we've hit enough on all of the other pieces. And then again, we'll be scheduling an advisory group meeting if possible between now and September 16th. And we plan to use the annual convention and caucuses to get feedback on this stuff as well. Any final questions on the housing and land use space before I make one more comment related to interim and turn it back to Justin for the other items? Okay. I've got one quick item here on interim, and then I'll turn back to Justin, and then Carson will basically give you your assignments on research. You may have seen a few weeks ago, the Utah Supreme Court issued a decision on the redistricting case, which has generated a lot of concern at the Capitol. So that everyone's aware, the league did receive a request to file an amicus brief on that issue over a year ago. We have an amicus brief, or an amicus subcommittee that includes board members and attorneys from the Municipal Attorneys Association. And because of our policy, we declined to file an amicus brief over a year ago. So that decision came out last month, and there's been quite a bit of chatter, including several articles recently that will be part of our LPC follow-up materials about potential state legislative action. They've wanted the league to get involved in the issue for a couple of reasons. One, the legislative power in the Constitution is also the legislative power that you as council members exercise. So when the Supreme Court or a court rules on what does it mean to reform or alter government, that does affect the legislative authority of city councils. However, the Supreme Court did not determine what does reform or alter mean. So part of the reason we did not get involved in the case is because the case wasn't about the definition of reform or alter. It was whether or not redistricting met the definition of reform or alter. So just know we expect the legislature will continue to ask for us to weigh in on that. And there's discussion potentially of a constitutional amendment around either redistricting specifically, initiative power, or legislative power more generally. So stay tuned, but we just wanted to give you a quick update there. And it's one we'll be monitoring very closely. And both Justin and I have had several conversations with House and Senate leadership on it. We've brought it back to the league board a couple of times and we'll continue to keep the league board informed. But I think this issue, I think, is going to hang over a lot of what the legislature does this week and in the weeks to come. So stay tuned. Okay, let me get my stuff out of your way.
All right, yeah, and this quick public service announcement. There are multiple ballot propositions that are going to be on the ballot this year. Bonds, other ballot propositions you may have locally. Just a reminder that you should not use political or public resources for political purposes. Going back to my previous life in the state elections office, I spent a lot of time chasing down things that cities, county school districts put out there on various different issues. So again, do not use public resources for political purposes, whether it's a school bond, your bond, public safety bond, county bond, whatever it is. So here's your homework. Please review 2011-1203 or have your attorney review 2011-1203 and tell you what you can do, what you can't do, what you can talk about, where you can talk about it, and where you cannot. We are planning on getting an FAQ, a white paper, something like that out in the next couple of weeks. By annual, we'll have an FAQ on this one, but take this one seriously. Please review this one. You don't want to get into trouble inadvertently. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Carson to talk about, maybe research.
Something over here, Justin.
Oh, yeah, Lynn.
Sorry, Lynn Pace, Sandy City. Cameron didn't ask for our feedback on the redistricting thing, but in as much as, I know the board will make the decision there, but in as much as this is the Legislative Policy Committee, I just thought it was worth voicing at least the perspective that this is not our problem. For the same reason we didn't file an amicus brief, I don't think we should get involved in the constitutional amendment. This is a problem of state action and state hubris, if you will, and I think we ought to let them solve their own problem and not get involved.
Okay, noted. I'm not even going to re-comment because we're almost out of time. Go for it, Chris.
All right, let's see if I can bring us home by 1:45. So just wanted to quickly check in on research. We presented on this back in April. I wasn't here for May, so maybe Justin presented on it in May. As you might remember, there's been a couple items added, so we're trying to churn out as much information as we can. And we've got a couple asks for you specifically as LPC members right now. So we will send out a recap email likely tomorrow morning, just trying to detail these asks. But first, there'll be a justice court survey that'll be coming out pretty soon. That'll be likely in that recap email, if not by Friday Facts, that we'll be asking you to all fill out kind of high level policy on justice courts. And I don't see Matt Dixon, but I want to thank Matt Dixon for his work on that. And then we'll be asking for feedback on some of the proposals you've heard. I know there's been a lot of proposals added to the Zoom box as well as Slido. I wasn't able to get through all of the comments and respond to them, but we'll process all of those and incorporate those into our concept. So thank you again. If you want to take this back to your cities, your staff, or your electeds, and get back to us, we welcome that, but we need it tomorrow, close of business, so we can kind of compile it and make sure that we have that factored into our counter proposal. And then the other one, some of you may be aware that state law requires the ABC to only issue licenses to businesses, liquor licenses to businesses within a certain distance from community locations, which includes parks, schools. There's a few others. And what we're trying to do, I know that there's been some examples in communities, typically in redevelopment situations where the city may be wanting to add a mixed use center that has a restaurant, and the restaurant wants to serve alcohol but can't because there's a public park nearby, or because there's a school or a church nearby. So we're looking at this policy in the redevelopment context, and we've asked the larger cities who tend to do more of this kind of redevelopment to provide us some maps, just using GIS to figure out which areas of their city would just be off limits to this kind of redevelopment, specifically restaurants. And two of those cities have, if you have, we're not asking everybody to do that kind of GIS analysis, but if you have examples where you wanted to do a redevelopment project or you wanted to locate a park in a specific area, but it would have pushed out another business, we'd love to hear those examples because they can kind of just help inform our conversation a little bit better. Again, we're hoping to get that by Tuesday and we'll send out a reminder for that. But any of this kind of information will help us better inform some of the policy discussions with other stakeholders. Lastly, we'll be doing another fall land use survey. This time we pushed it back a little bit more. Last year it was already in the field by now. There's still a lot of conversations ongoing at the state level. We wanted to make sure we're giving you the opportunity to weigh in on those. So we'll probably launch that shortly after the annual conference. So please keep an eye out for that. There's a lot going on right now. I'm sure there'll be some other surveys going out in the near future that we'll be asking you for. So please watch Friday Facts. Please watch your LPC emails. And thank you for all your time and your work providing us input. Is there anything else, Justin?
No, and so if you want to wander that mic over toward Kate.
Is it time for our final motion?
Yes, it is.
I love our final motion. Does anyone have any other business they need to bring forward? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting and look forward to seeing you all in September at the annual conference.
We got one?
I heard a motion way over there. I'm not sure who made it. And I saw a hand over here for second. I'm hoping Justin sees who these are. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Looks like it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you all.